when you're in difficulty, you make things up. Uh, when I went last to Europe, I listened. I was in France. I listened and I watched on French TV as one leader after another talked, as Michael just summarized, about all the horrible things Russia did to Europe, and number one, and number two, the enormous danger that Russia represented once again to the rest of Europe, and that they were the great leaders who were holding on to democracy against Russia's authoritarian behavior, and they were holding on to democracy and their alliance with the United States by fighting for Ukraine. This was the story. And when I met with people there, and I said to them, as far as I can read the history of Europe, Russia never invaded the rest of Europe. That never happened. But Europe invaded Russia repeatedly. And every time they did, they were defeated by the Russians. Napoleon tried it. That did not work out well. Kaiser Wilhelm tried it in World War One, and that did not work out well. And Hitler tried it in World War II, and that did not work out well.
Don't forget Sweden.
Don't forget. So, I mean, what are you talking? Where does this come from? And then, yes, we all know, if we paid attention, that it was the great European American idea to defeat Russia in Ukraine by stopping to buy oil and gas from a country that they depicted as a gas station pretending to be a country. Okay, those sanctions failed. They didn't stop Russia at all. Russia went somewhere else, making it look like if the Russians had weaponized what they were doing, what was the point? They didn't need to do it. You would see a massive alienation of Europe undertaken as an act of policy, which could have been easily solved otherwise by selling oil and gas to India and China. And how do we know that? Because that's what they did. There was no need to weaponize to Europe. None. And it might have been a much smarter move than ever weaponizing to say to Europe, we will not interrupt oil and gas. We will not cripple your economies. But no, so old and so entrenched was the Cold War mentality of the American empire leading a destroyed Europe into the future, that these politicians who literally were born into that situation and have lived their entire political lives in the Cold War, they have now constructed a Putin, which is simply a changed spelling for Stalin. They first demonized Stalin, went way too far with that also, out of an American notion that when you fight an enemy of America, it is God versus the devil and has to be constructed in that way because Americans don't know how to mobilize themselves, apparently, any other way. So if you're now against the new leaders, they have to be demonized too. They demonize Putin, they demonize Xi Jinping, is childish. And it's the behavior of an empire that has to attribute unspeakable evil to anyone who wants them to think, oh my goodness, the empire isn't there anymore. Look, it is clear to me that the Europeans are now facing a horrific future for themselves. And you know something? Many of them know it. They may not quite say it, or if they do dare say it, they say it in technological terms. My friend Yanis Varoufakis explains quite rightly that all the great new technological breakthroughs are coming from the United States or China. Where is Europe? And the answer he gives to the question he poses is it's nowhere. It can't do it. It can't organize itself. It can't unify. It doesn't have a unified program for immigration, even something you would have thought the Europeans could replicate the Americans in getting at least enough of a consensus to be horrible to immigrants. Instead, half the countries are and the other half aren't. They can't do anything. Their currency they can't manage, their trade relationships they can't manage. Let me leave you with the following thought, which any informed person would have to ask on pain of otherwise being deficient. If the United States can get its way by imposing tariffs on the world now, what will prevent it as its problems deepen from doing more of it? It's the old problem. If you do it, if you accommodate these tariffs now, if you really do what you have told Mr. Trump you will do, you are telling every American politician who comes after Mr. Trump, here's the way to solve your problems. Blame the rest of the world, punish the rest of the world by imposing payments to yourself from the rest of the world. And you don't have to worry about how the rest of the world will respond because you're the big empire who doesn't care, who doesn't have to worry. They all have to worry about the big US. The big US doesn't have to worry about them. The fundamental flaw here is the United States represents 4.5% of the population of this planet. The other 95% and a half are not Americans. And you cannot get around that fact no matter what you do. And that means a policy in which you, a mouse, is assaulting the elephant will get you squashed.
I want to make a comment on that wonderful Trump speech that Nima played. Right after Trump made those statements, Japan replied to say, wait a minute, that's not what happened at all. That's not the agreement we made. There was supposed to be a statement that 90% was going to be an enormous investment in the United States, but the earnings, the distribution of the earnings were going to be in proportion to the money that's put up. If we put up 90% of the money, we get 90% of the earnings. If we don't put up 90% of the money, and if Europe, it's a 50-50 between the US and Japan, then all they get is 50%, not 90%. Well, so Nima, you begin the show by commenting on what Trump said about Wickout's meeting with Trump. You can never believe Trump's description of a meeting. It's always identical. He comes on television. Before the other countries have a chance to respond, he said, I won. Other countries surrendered totally to what I demanded. I'm so strong that I can get anything I want. They totally surrendered. Then you have the other countries say, wait a minute, where is the written agreement from all this? Where's the small print? Where does all this happen? When Richard mentioned quite appropriately the Japanese agreement to open their automobile market to American cars. Well, I think we've discussed in an earlier show with you, Nima, the fact that Japanese really don't have a market for American cars. Their roads are narrower than the United States. Their parking spaces are narrower. They don't. They want right-hand drive, not left-hand steering wheels. There's plus there's beginning to be a backlash in Japan, very much like we've seen in Canada and other countries, against buying the U.S. So how on earth are you going to make Japan Japan consumers buy these American cars that are now okay tariff free? But what's going to happen? How are you going to make them buy U.S. genetically modified corn and grain and other soybeans and other agricultural things? All of these agreements on paper that Trump acts as if somehow there's a reality base, isn't a reality base at all. That's the whole problem. And regarding the Russian trade, the oil trade with Europe, remember what happened? How was that weaponized? It was weaponized by the United States blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. That was an act of war. And what there's been discussion of in the last week is that British intelligence and with, I'm sure America going along, has been planning to sabotage Russian oil tankers. They're having underwater Navy people plant bombs on the hull to explode the tankers and sank them. This is international terrorism. That's really the only kind of war, the asymmetrical war, in which the United States thinks it has an advantage. And there's talk of a false, the British modus operandi is to mount a false flag. Let's sink a Russian oil tanker in the Persian Gulf and stop the oil trade there and say that Russia did it instead of ourselves. You're dealing with the belief by Trump and by the United States generally, long before Trump, thinking that they can give their false cover story and that other countries are going to believe it. And I don't think other countries are going to be willing to believe their cover story any longer. You can look at, I want to add something to the European giveaway, since we're talking about information technology that Varoufakis brought about. Europe's response was, well, we're not going to be able to develop our own industry until we make the United States companies, foreign affiliates in our countries, pay an income tax. And so we're going to have a standardized global tax that all countries have to pay. Part of the agreement that Europe had threatened to reimpose countervailing taxes on the United States was, look, we've already passed this law. This is going to be part of what we're going to do if you really impose this sacrificial, make us a sacrificial lamb in the tariffs. We're going to tax American companies there. But after all, if we don't tax American information technology companies, how are we going to have a level playing field with European ability to develop a technology? Well, they never did it. They gave in. They've surrendered. Again, this is an object lesson for other countries to see what to do. And Trump has in effect declared war on other countries. It's an economic war, and economic war is as destructive as military colonialism is an outright military war. It's destructive of the economy, it's destructive of employment, and it's all together just as threatening because it threatens foreign sovereignty. And so the question is, what are other countries going to do? Well, I think if we're talking about what their response is going to be to all this, which I think is the logical direction in which our discussion should be going, what can they do? Well, they can stop buying American arms, military arms. For one thing, the war in Ukraine has shown that American arms don't work against Russian or Chinese or Iranian modern arms. So that just as American foreign policy is living 50 years in the past, so is American military technology. It's still based on navies, on aircraft carriers, on destroyer ships, and on tanks, not on missiles or on missile defense systems, which don't work. So that's part of it. Ukraine has shown that doesn't work. Foreign countries can begin taxing American mining companies and oil companies and the infrastructure monopolies they bought and say, this is economic rent. We're going to do what Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and the whole 19th century classical economists recommended. We're going to tax economic rent, where you can make as many profits as you want, and just have to pay normal profit tax, which are going to be low, but not. We're going to recover the national patrimony. Well, especially for the global South countries, especially for Africa, national Latin America, this kind of tax can recover their national sovereignty, because that's what we're discussing today is all about. Will other countries be able to assert their national sovereignty independently of America's dictates? And the fictitious cover story, the junk economics that American foreign policy is based on. There are more radical alternatives. They can stop paying their dollar debts to the United States. They can create alternative international organizations that we've discussed before. A whole world is opening up to them. That I'm sure that they don't need us to help decide. There will be somebody in these countries that are working very rapidly to find an alternative that'll rescue their economies.
If I could add, I think there's also the private sector that we have not discussed, which is going to be taking steps long before the public dares to do it because of the politics of it. And I learned this when I recently visited Canada. Every advertiser in all these countries around the world has a new theme around which to construct their advertising. If they have been hired by a local producer of fill in the blank, whatever it is, washing machines, it doesn't matter. They now have a new theme. Buy the domestic washing machine, my fellow citizen. Otherwise, you're doing the bidding of Donald Trump, whose name is now not positive in every one of these countries. They all feel attacked by him, which basically they have been. They all feel damaged or threatened with damage, and they want to know, what can I do? Every advertiser has figured this out already. I got something you can do. Buy the product that I'm the advertiser for. That will be your way to frustrate Mr. Trump in response to all that he has done to upset or anger or frighten you. This is going to be a staggering example of what is dryly put in the textbooks as a non-tariff protection measure. Very common. These countries will be swept, they already are, by anti-American views, feelings, ideas, true ones, untrue ones. All of it will be mushed together. But the net result will be that what Mr. Trump said in the clip, we've opened them up, he's going to discover, and now they're closing him down again. not by act of government, which won't be necessary, but by act of the entire private profit sectors of the economy in their industrial associations, in their contracts with advertisers. They are going to be doing what their business logic requires. If you lose one market, you go look for another one. You tell your advertiser, use what's important in the public mind, which isn't just sex and all the other modes of selling, but it's also foreign policy when it is as dominant a theme. And let me tell you, it was all over Canadian television, day after day, what Mr. Carney said to Mr. Trump, what Mr. Trump said about or to Mr. Carney, and so on. That is the public mentality. And by the way, the numbers are already there. Canadian tourism in the United States is drastically down from what it used to be. Places in Florida and elsewhere that normally accommodate floods of Canadian tourists, because Canada's in the north and Florida is southern and warm, all of that's hurting the American business. If you wanted to know what the job creation was by what it did with autos, you have to balance that against what it did for tourism and what it did for in all the other ways. And now a final thought that has worried me. I keep explaining, as you know, that a declining empire is leading the United States to try to control the whole rest of the world, with the unwanted but quite logical result that it's really isolating the United States. Just like Mr. Trump does when he says, I'm going with fossil fuels to make my cars and trucks run, and the whole rest of the world is going with the electric cars and trucks, which do a better job for a lower price. And that in the end will cost Americans competitive jobs on a scale we can't even imagine. But now you have to ask the next question. What is it that makes Americans unable to see the self isolating, self destructive path they're on? And my answer is Gaza. Because Israel is clearly, as almost everyone except Netanyahu and his circle can see, yes, it is blasting Lebanon, and it's blasting Gaza, and it's blasting the West Bank, but it is also isolating itself step by step. And yet it is moving. Nothing is too much. It's a terrifying image, but it might help us explain why the same group of people in this country who must deny the decline of the empire here cannot see the dead end of what the Israelis, that part of Israel, is doing, not just, of course, to that part, but to the entire project of Israel, and, dare I say it, to the entire position of Jews around the world who are going to be held accountable for what is going on there, even if they were among its fiercest critics. But you're watching a kind of parallel, self-isolating, self-destructive behavior beyond all rationality. Denial is usually the forerunner of even more psychologically perverse attempts to live in the world. We are caught up in that, and we can only hope and speak out, of course, to try to get a recognition before it's literally too late.
Well, you're talking about the emergence of a new international consciousness of independence, Richard. And yeah, I think you're right as to the catalysts of this. If they see the abhorrence to what the United States is backing in the Middle East as it tries to use Israel to act as America's proxy to be America's Ukraine, in controlling all of the Near Eastern oil so that it can weaponize oil trade throughout the world, then this is helping them realize that there has to be an alternative. And time, I think, is on the side of the nations that are being driven out of the U.S. trade and investment orbit. I think it's on their side because Trump's tariff policy and the related domestic policies that he's following are going to spur a price inflation in the United States simultaneously with the US economy slowing down. And the rising US debt defaults are already occurring. A financial crash is building up. And it's the result of other countries breaking away. And the American investors and the American companies. You've talked about foreign companies and in the private sector reacting against the United States, as well as governments. Well, what the American companies are going to realize that they have been left isolated, and their international, multinational operations are going to be prone to foreign retaliation just as well. And I think that this financial crash is going to have major consequences politically at home to go hand in hand with the international chaos that Trump has created. So he's not only creating tariff crisis for the world economy, he's laid the seeds for what has to be the U.S. buckling under this break in world trade and finance and monetary policy, just as other countries are suffering. So America's, if the American empire declines, it's trying to bring the whole rest of the world down with it. That's the dynamic that other countries have to cope with.
If I could, Nima, these kinds of conversations. Look, Michael and I may be making mistakes. We may be overemphasizing something, missing something, inadequately appreciating yet another tendency. In a rational community, we would have these ideas, which we didn't develop, which other people that have taught us helped us to see. Both Michael and I spent a lifetime being professors in American universities and doing the typical jobs that professional economists do. We didn't live on the moon, and we weren't educated on the moon either. We're part of this country, but we appear on a Brazilian podcast that you have the good sense and the hard work to produce, and I'm grateful to you for doing it. But we have to understand we live in a society that has to marginalize the perspectives that Michael articulates in his writing, in his books, in his interviews. I try to do the same, with my arguments in my capacity, but we are kept at a very marginalized corner of what passes. We're not going to have a conversation about the declining empire on Meet the Press. We're not going to have a debate about what does the BRICS represent? Are the BRICS part of a reorganized global capitalism? Are they a challenge to global capitalism? How do you understand their heterogeneity? They have China, but they have India. They have Cuba, but they have Saudi Arabia. But these are very important questions. BRICS is now an alliance of a majority of the people of this planet. And you barely hear it. You hear a clip occasionally from Mr. Trump mocking the BRICS or threatening the BRICS. The BRICS are unimportant, or the BRICS, if you do anything to the dollar, well, then I'll hit you, the usual. Right? That's what we get. But a conversation among people who study this so that the population has a sense of what's going on, no, 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 no. We are kept in our silos. The mass media tell a story in which none of these questions and none of the perspectives that either Michael or I articulate have any allowed space. That is as rigid a censorship as you could imagine. The only thing worse is if they arrest Michael and me, and we are disappeared in the way that everyone in this country knows might be coming down the pike.
I can see the thought that you must have had re-entering the United States from Canada.
Yep.
Are they going to deport you for having? Are they going to hassle you?
What all I can tell you was when we were sitting in the airport, in those plastic waiting lounges before you get on your airplane, and the chairs are close together, so you can hear the conversations of other people waiting to get on the airplane. Half of those conversations were people making jokes about would they be stopped at the border? Would the ICE people come for them and arrest them? Now, sometimes these were done as jokes, but other times they were quite serious.
Yeah.
Because I'm married to a psychotherapist and I've learned to appreciate Sigmund Freud, I know that jokes are probably a more reliable indicator of what's worrying people than anything else.